Hello, Happy New Year. Welcome to this webinar on the Global Wind Workforce Outlook 2025 to 2030. Thank you for joining us. The Outlook report was published by GWO and GWEC just a few weeks ago. Today, we've gathered the authors, the researchers, and a panel of experts together so we can discuss the findings, which are all about solving workforce development challenges we face in offshore and onshore wind. So first, I'd like to introduce our presenters and panelists while also running you through the agenda. We'll start with a brief introduction and global market outlook towards 2030 from Feng Xiao, who's Director of Market Intelligence at GWEC. After this introduction, we'll focus on the workforce outlook itself. GWO's market analyst, Hai-Ching Wang, will walk you through the key findings of our main report. After that, we'll open the virtual floor to our panelists and discuss these themes in more detail. In addition to Feng and Hai-Ching, we've got some experts from across the field of wind power development and workforce training. From GWO, we have our Chief Executive, Jakob Lau-Holst. And from Vestas, we have John Barry, who's VP for Training and Workforce Development. John is also Chair of the GWO Board of Directors. And also from GWEC, we're joined by Kshitij Madan, who's one of the report's authors with a focus on key markets featured in the country commentary section. So that's your introduction in a nutshell. I hope you find this webinar useful. And if you have any feedback for us, please add your comments in the usual way. We'll be sharing the slide deck with you tomorrow following our second webinar later today. So first, we hand over to Feng to summarize the global market outlook. Thanks for joining us, Feng. Over to you.
Thanks, Marv. Morning, everyone, no matter where you are on this webcast. So before we jump into the key findings for this global workforce report, which is the primary focus for this study, I'm going to spend a few minutes to quickly walk you through the global wind market outlook. We use this outlook as a foundation for our projection in terms of workforce across global. So the numbers we use for this year's study, it's from our Q3 2025 outlook, which was released in December as well. So the next slide, where you can see looking at global growth in general, I think people or audience follow our GWEC Global Wind Report. That's a report we launch almost every year, end of Q1 or beginning of Q2, depending on which event we use to feature this launch of this study. But the 2024, as we launched in London to feature IEA Energy Security Summit, the number is clear. Despite it was a challenging year, but 2024 remained a record year with 117 gigawatt new installation added across the global, bring the cumulative installation to 1,136 gigawatt. And looking at 2025, actually, we did increase our projection by 8% in Q3, primarily due to the strong growth from APAC regions. As we all know, that's the region where we host two strongest market, mainland China and also India. I think the new links, my colleague who joined this webcast, Kshitij, shared with us internally yesterday, Pearl, I think it's good rationale. We increased, for example, India released the install around 6.3 gigawatt of new onshore wind installation in a single year. It's a new record. So think about China going to have around 100 gigawatt. So this make 2025 absolutely going to be another record year in history, more than 150 gigawatt to be built. Looking at the growth in the next 5 years, between 2026 and 2030, so you can see the numbers is quite stable with the CAGR, that's the compound annual growth rate, 6.5%. It will give us an average around 177 gigawatt. This simply means that we're going to have the record installation every year, follow a new record in 2025. Looking at onshore wind, still a big backbone of the growth. Um, Despite we see offshore wind continue to grow. For onshore wind, the average annual installation rate, that's 151 gigawatt. This gave us a CAGR of 4.4%. Looking at the offshore, on average, that's still 25. We did, just to be clear, downgrade significantly earlier this year, last year, for global offshore wind installation projection due to various reasons, microeconomic challenge, inflation, policy instability in the US, and also supply chain constraint, etc. In Q3, already in Q2 2025, we downgrade our global offshore wind projection by 25%. This is in line with the other organization, including IEA, when they're doing their new global renewable outlook report. Next slide, let's take a quick look about the growth per region. On the top, you can see the total new installation figures per year from 2025 to 2030. The previous slides already indicate that we're going to have the record year every year, but how those numbers will be put together from where? So this slide gives you the clear idea. So looking at onshore wind alone, China will continue to be the key drivers. You can see pretty much made up around 60% of global onshore wind addition. As some of you follow the GWEC activity, earlier last year in October in Beijing, we co-launched this Beijing Declaration, where we are looking for have like something around 120 gigawatt per year for the next 5 years. That's also the 15th 5 years plan for the Chinese government. So after China, follow up by Europe. But Europe, based on our Q3 outlook, is going to provide 16% of the new additions for onshore wind in next 5 years, followed by North America, Latin. North America, just to be clear, normally it will provide around 10% of the new addition for normally in our 5 years outlook. But you can see right now, only 5%. If we exclude Canada, the market share is even lower for the US for very good reasons. Looking at emerging market in Africa and Middle East, that's something we want to highlight a bit as well. This region, we're going to see some stable growth, primarily from Saudi Arabia, and also there are two key markets, Morocco and Egypt. We're going to have some big project to be built in the next 5 years as well, with the turbine produced by Chinese turbine OEM. For offshore wind, as mentioned in the previous slide, quite stable despite we downgrade the projection. So by 2030, offshore wind are going to make up 18% of the new installations. In total, for the next 5 years, we're going to have 1 terawatt to be built. Just to put some numbers as reference, in June 2023 in London, Jakob was there as well. We co-celebrate the 1 terawatt installation wind power capacity across the global, but it took almost 4 decades. But now looking at the new installation, so it's just 6 years, we can make up 1 terawatt. So you can see how quickly the renewable or wind installation has been accelerated. However, this faster speed of growth doesn't really give us enough capacity to help the world to stay on the track in terms of 1.5 degree pathway. So to get there, we need at least 2.7 terawatt by 2030. So looking at the split of the information by countries, my last bullet point here, you can see those are top 10 market, we believe, in terms of new additions in 2025 and 2030. Out of those top 10 countries, we have 6 countries included as a case study in its workforce report. If you are interested, you can just jump into the country commentary sections where you are going to find the detail, those 6 markets, including Germany, India, US, Brazil, Australia, France. So I think that's pretty much a quick overview about market growth. Strong growth ahead of us, but do we have enough workforce to support such a strong growth? So I'm going to stop here, hand over to Haichen, who is going to give us some insight about these workforce studies. Thank you.
Thank you, Feng, for sharing the outlook on capacity addition. Looking ahead, clearly there is a stable growth, and these numbers are really important because it shows us the scale of ambition, also the space, the pace for wind energy development. And also the wind workforce outlook we're sharing today is built on the same capacity outlook. As we often discuss wind capacity development from the perspective of investment, policy, and supply chain, today we'll be focusing on another essential part of the picture, wind workforce. Because wind energy growth doesn't happen automatically. It takes a prepared workforce to turn the ambition into real projects and from projects to generated power. Wind workforce development is also one of GWO's core strategies. As we advance our mission, we aim to gain a practical understanding of the technician demand by this industry, and also to understand the scale of effort needed to meet this demand. So a key question we ask is, how many wind technicians are needed by the industry as new capacity is added year after year, and the growth of total commissioned asset, according to our forecast, we see 682,000 wind technicians will be needed by year 2030. This is a big number, but it also only captures a small part of the total demand of wind technicians, because this forecast scope includes only frontline technicians who work in construction, installation, operation, and maintenance. So it really only captures a fraction of the total employment impact brought by the wind. And based on the fast growth we can see on the graph, clearly significant amount of effort will be needed around recruiting and technician training. To inform this effort better, to allocate resource better, some absolute numbers can give us limited information. So this report also explores the structure of technician demand, specifically where, by location, by part of the value chain, are these technicians needed. And also, as the industry has much matured, there are widely accepted ways of handling construction and maintenance tasks. This type of alignment forms a good foundation for us to also estimate technician demand by their responsibilities and job roles. So move forward, I'd like to share the structure aspect of this analysis, and we start to look at technician demand by offshore and onshore segment. So the technician demand generated by offshore segment is expected to rise from 89,000 in 2025 to around 159,000 by 2030. This has an average annual growth rate of 12%. While offshore segment is more labor intensive per capacity unit, we can see on the graph that in absolute terms, offshore technician demand speaks only a small part of the combined demand. onshore will continue to be the majority, and its workforce demand will rise from 380,000 in 2026 to 468 by 2030. This has an average growth of 4%. Geographically speaking, Asia is the hotspot for technician demand in both onshore and offshore segment. And in this region, China is leading. India is also an important demand center because of its fast economic growth and wind energy development. We can notice for onshore segment that the technician demand has leveled off a little bit in recent years. This reflects an ongoing capacity race, primarily in China. Developers are fastly adopting much larger turbines, 8, 10 megawatts turbines. And as a result, fewer turbines are needed to be installed to generate the same amount of capacity energy. And this moderates technician demand. But outside the region, we can see the demand will grow consistently across regions. And outside Asia, Europe is the demand center, and the demand will continue to grow over time. Another dimension of technician demand is which part of the value chain do they support? This is an important question because not every part of the value chain hire frontline technicians the same way, and their workforce demand is not impacted by the same forces. Take manufacture, for example. Manufacture sits on the upper stream of a wind project flow, and its workforce demand is largely driven by order books and production plans. These activities respond to macroeconomy and to a long time horizon. Also think of a manufacturer site. The roles involved don't strictly require wind-specific skills, and this offers employers a lot of flexibility to source workers with only transferable skills. But the picture can be very different if we move down to construction, installation, operation, and maintenance. As wind projects move forward, technician demand is generated quickly, immediately in specific locations and require wind-specific skills. So in this sense, these two key phases really stand out in any wind workforce discussion, because they are really sensitive to project execution, the timeline, and they're the least flexible in terms of skill requirement and skill availability. So now we take a closer look at the technician demand from these two key phases. We observe a workforce shift is underway. Basically, the technician demand from maintenance and operations are growing fast and is catching up with the demand from construction and installation. This is an important pattern because there is some difference about the hiring mode in these two key phases. Construction can generate a short-term peak of technician demand. And for companies who are involved in this responsibility, a practical people strategy is to have a mix of full-time workers and seasonal workers. Even for EPC companies who are really specialized in this responsibility, it is rare for them to have the full-time technicians as the majority. On the other hand, operation and maintenance heavily rely on full-time technicians because companies or functions really need a solid foundation to retain. technician skills and expertise. So look into the future. We expect even more full-time roles in the industry. A deeper layer of analysis within these two key sectors is the technician demand by job roles and responsibilities. We identified 7 major responsibilities within these two key phases, and also the corresponding roles that carry this responsibility. In practice, these technician roles are scattered across different types of companies, and they will often work together on the same project. A familiar example is the technical advisors delegated by OEM companies who work alongside the EPC team during installation. This analysis help us to understand what is the volume of skills and competencies needed to equip the workforce. And from this analysis, assembly work, the green one, the dark green one, appears to be the most labor-intensive responsibility. Electrical work, the lighter green one, and regular inspection colored navy here, are also we also see a strong and growing demand in this responsibility. Compared to a more standardized assembly work, electrical work and regular inspection is more and more impacted by the evolving technology. And therefore, the technician training and upscaling for these responsibilities should also adapt. And also, as we may observe in the news or observe in the field, electricity, like grid infrastructure development, is accelerating. And very likely this will compete electrician with wind industry. All this together, all the patterns, the changing demand profile will push the industry to think and plan carefully how to transfer short-term workers into long-term roles, bring in more people, and also train technicians to the required skills. So these questions led us to explore how workforce development is handled by the industry as of today. To start with a conclusion, we found the responsibility for developing workforce is fragmented, is more fragmented than ever. In industry, we have specialized actors, and each hire only a small fraction of the entire technician group. Take construction, for example. Developers can choose to sign contracts directly with service providers, turbine suppliers, or even delegate this project management responsibility to a third-party company. Either way, developers, their focus will be on project oversight, finance, and their direct hiring of a frontline technician is minimal. And in this case, EPC companies and OEM companies, they hold the bulk of frontline technicians. In early days, a few players led the market formation, and they had the technical expertise, funding, and ability to serve nearly the entire value chain, from design to construction to operation. Following that, during the rapid scale-up, more followers entered the market. They brought in more competition, or also more specialized services. Now, specialization, efficiency, reducing cost of energy are top priorities for investors and developers. And in this context, partnering with third-party services can offer a lot of flexibility and has become a natural approach. We foresee this trend to continue as the capacity building target growing. Following the common project setup, we interviewed duty holders for more information. How do they handle workforce planning internally? We had this graph also in the report. You can read it more in detail there. And in this session, I can walk you through the main findings. We evaluated how different types of companies structure their workforce planning internally. Some companies will have this as a project management process. Some will use it as technician competence management process, and some companies will elevate it as part of strategic planning. And in the graph, the lighter box means this planning is done on an ad hoc basis, and a darker box means this planning is done regularly. So through this analysis, what we found is a managed gap in construction and installation. As we mentioned earlier, investors, their direct hiring of frontline technicians is minimal. And in this phase, we found EPC companies who also hold a bulk of frontline technicians. They often treat this as a project level process. When it comes to strategic planning, for example, budgeting for long-term talent pool, invest in IT infrastructure, upscaling program, these practices are limited. Our view is that if companies who operate in these phases, they are more aware of the benefit and incorporate this workforce planning process in their strategic planning, this can advance workforce development at a micro level. And move to macro level, the question becomes what can be done to build workforce capacity at scale. Through our research, we met many good examples of collaboration between local government agencies and private sector, the investors. In these good examples, private sector's investors can contribute by sharing industrial knowledge and clearly outlining the job roles, skills, competencies needed for a successful wind project. And local government agencies contribute by a local workforce mapping, describe the local workforce demographic characteristics. What are the competencies, skills the local workforce already have prior to wind introduced to the community? As we mentioned earlier, in construction and maintenance, the technician demand can be generated immediately in specific location. And we observe very common, some technician vacancies are difficult to fill. And in this case, transactional recruiting can be very helpful. They know where to find those experts. And we also observe public sectors are actively planning and designing forming programs for knowledge transfer and skill retention. The point is, after the foreign crew leave, the knowledge and skills can be kept to the local community, so the local workforce can serve the asset over a longer term. And back to the question, what can be done to build this wind workforce capacity at scale? This is a very solution-oriented question. And today we have a panelist with years of industry expertise. And I really look forward to hearing more practical advice in the panel discussion. This page wraps up the content I want to share. And I'd like to pass the stage back to Ralph. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Hai-Ching. Thank you for the summary, and a few questions have come through, and we'll try and get to those if there's time. And now we'll open up to the rest of our panel. I'll probably ask Feng to come in initially. Feng, you've been working in the wind power industry for a couple of decades, as has Jakob and John. Um, there's a clear picture that Hai Qing presented around how the industry has moved from a few big companies doing everything with regards to workforce planning to now a much more fragmented picture. How do these challenges play out in real life for developers when more work is done through contractors and different partners? And what kind of challenges does this create?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ralph. I think the key findings Hachin provide, it does show actually the transition of the industry. I think I remember there's one slide showed the timeline of the project development from we're beginning to today. Now, I mean, I've been following the industry for already 2 decades. So back at the early stage, size of the project really too small, and probably one product which can be up and running for at least 5 years until the new model was released. So it gives the time for the industry to adopt, even for some specialized ISP to follow the technology. But with more turbine installed, primarily from let's see from 2010, where the average annual installation is already like 35 gigawatt. But start from 2020, I think that's the turning point where even though we had the COVID, but we got the installation rush in China and installation in emerging market picking up. So start from 2020, we see an average around 95 gigawatt installed. And in the past 2 years, as numbers I showed earlier, and 116 in 2023, 110 in 2024. This year, last year we had 150. So with a massive of installations at the same time with really big turbine, I think also mentioned, I think 8-10 megawatt for onshore, it has becoming a standard in China. Even though for the rest of the world, it's not catching up at the same pace, but you still see, in Europe, 6-7 megawatt turbine has become a standard. In India, the average turbine size is 3.x, but if you're looking at what's going on behind the ceiling, all the new turbine are going to launch the big turbine with 5.x. Someone is even bigger, up to 7.x at this moment. So technology evolution, that's one challenge. And also, if you're looking at over the years, the market share for offshore wind, you can see earlier stage offshore wind teeny tiny. But if you're looking at where we are today, offshore wind actually has gained attractions. So at the highest year, so new offshore wind installation could make up 10% of the total global installation. So as soon as we're talking about offshore, you got bigger value chain. So we're suddenly, it's not just the turbine or foundation. You got really long value chain, including your BOP with, offshore turbine installed far offshore. You need vessels to support installation for jackup vessel, heavy lift vessel, and also SOV and cruise transfer vessels and for maintenance. So in this case, I think project developer or owners of the project, they just felt struggling. So looking at our own GWEC statistics we release every year, we got global top 15 SO and operator for both total wind power installation and also for specific for offshore wind installation, the top 10 SO owner operator. You can see, for example, for global picture, the number one SO owner operator, they have 65 gigawatt under their belt. This is owned by the Chinese. So if you look in the European, for example, the larger European SO owner operator, that's the Spanish utility Iberdrola, 23 gigawatt. Look at America, next era, more than 20 gigawatt. So how can you manage to have everything under one roof and in terms of technology complexity? And as soon as you're talking about offshore, so you have to think about different scale, sub order, with this HVDC, HVAC installed to support transmission. You need high voltage specialists as well. So all I'm saying here is that I think this is basically due to the growth of the industry, the complexity has become much more comprehensive over the years. So as you know, no matter your construction company or EPC or developer or looking at the service side as well, so you have to adopt. That's probably why we see it makes sense for us to do a similar, to do some kind of analysis to compare what's the situation in the past and where we're today and how we're going to meet the even higher growth moving forward. So I hope this just properly address your question about why the industry is changing in terms of the workforce training as well. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that paints a pretty vivid picture of where we've arrived at. John, you've obviously also been working in the market for a long time and have experienced a lot of these dynamics as they've changed. What's your response to how things have changed from this scenario where we see developers having huge portfolios of assets but very limited control over workforce development? The OEMs like yourselves have taken a much greater degree of control. How can developers and yourselves lead workforce development effectively across the contracting picture in this much more fragmented situation that we've arrived at now?
Yeah, Ralph, I mean, I agree with what Fang was saying in terms of the kind of increased complexity, more complex turbines, more complex projects, higher volumes, often more challenging conditions as well. And in a more fragmented market as well. So there are more players involved right throughout the supply chain. I guess from an OEM perspective, and I think also from a developer perspective, the key thing is that you have a tremendous responsibility around how you influence that supply chain. And on a tactical level, that could be around just the way you set requirements for workforce in terms of roles, skills, competency expectations, real clarity on that. I mean, we know from the GWO experience that where GWO is successful is where the OEMs and the developers require that, and therefore that flows down into a supply chain as an expectation. If we sort of raise it up a level, I think we could say that the developer, the OEM, is responsible for setting standards as well. So both in terms of kind of competencies, but more generally in terms of the safety and quality expectations that are put onto those projects. I think, again, that really sort of sets the scene. And you can look at that both from a kind of compliance perspective. There's an expectation on compliance, but also more on a kind of cultural perspective as well. There's definitely something about sort of leading by example and saying that this is something where we put a very high focus on safety and quality. And that means we put a very high focus on the skills of our workforce. And then specifically, we define what we mean by that. And we put that into our requirements. So you really need to have a very end-to-end approach. And it is more difficult when you're not necessarily the provider of manpower. You're simply contracting that manpower in some cases, but the responsibility stays the same. You can't lose that responsibility as a duty holder. In fact, it becomes even more important the more complex the supply chain.
John, I'm going to keep you on for my next question, which is something that we focused on a lot more in the last few years, is about improving how the industry partners with government and associations like GWEC and ourselves in ARENA and private companies. Hai-Ching also mentioned that in the report there are some good examples of initiatives that have been created to structured workforce development. How important is this part of the work that the industry is doing?
Yeah, I think it's critical. I also think it's an area where we're still very immature, actually. It's something that we really need to improve. And again, it's because it's quite a complicated pitch. I think there's a role for the employer. So a company like Vestas, we are the ones setting the requirements. We're also the ones who have the demand for the jobs. And I think we need to make that much clearer. So what are those jobs? What do they look like? Definitely a role for government around policy, putting real focus on this, also investment, funding. And then in between that, there's a role for associations, like GWEC, like GWO, around helping to sort of summarize the real employer industry requirements, make that understandable, coherent, and then also be able to talk to government and to public groups around what does that look like, what would it take to support it. And then, of course, we have a key role for education providers. Can we have relevant programs that governments could recognise and they can see synergies across industries, but that are actually providing a pipeline of people with the skills that industry needs. So, yeah, absolutely critical to coordinate and make that environment work.
I'll pick up on one word then, relevance, because Pulse, we've been working together for a long time on, helping to promote and deploy standardized training that's deemed as relevant for the employers in this industry to make people ready for work. And there have been a lot of initiatives that the industry's been delivering, and there's a long-term plan now at GWO from the point of view of the training product strategy. Can you give us a few highlights of some of the plans that are going to be coming out of GWO for the next 12 months, and maybe also clarify what's important around producing things like industry guidelines and so on?
So do I have half an hour or maybe an hour or so to just go through all of this? No.
You've got as long as
No, okay. But thank you, Rob. Yeah, so I mean, looking at 628,000 people that we need as a global workforce in just 5 years' time, and understanding that we have churn in the industry, it means that almost more than half of these are going to be new entrants to the industry. We may be able to recover some by transitioning workers into the industry from other sectors, but we'll be competing for that workforce with other electricity sectors. So we really do have to get our act together and send a clear ask to governments about how they can support us in skilling for renewables. So training and skilling the young people who will be the future generations that are delivering the energy transition. So that's why we're doing work like this foundational work with GWEC and GWO Intelligence to look at what is actually our challenge. And then we're also working with governments. We've been working with IRENA for the past 2 years, the International Renewable Energy Agency, to produce a guideline for governments at large on how to help us build this workforce. And when you want to ask governments to do something, you have to be fairly clear about it, and you have to stand united in organizations. And so I'm happy that we also, inside GWO and inside GWEC, are becoming better at describing what are job roles, what does a job role mean, what are the competencies that are needed, what are the skills that are needed to perform certain tasks. And this report dives a little bit into that. We have some other reports on job roles, and we have a training product strategy, we call it, sort of a roadmap for development of standards that are plugging the holes, if you will, in the portfolio of standards that we have. Next week, I'm traveling to Abu Dhabi to the IRENA General Assembly, and where we are soft launching a program that's called Jobs for Re. And Jobs for Re is that guidance to governments, and has those messages to governments about what it is that we need and what we'd like them to do in skilling for renewables. But interestingly, Jobs for Re was one of the elements in here is about mobility of workforce, and most of that installation workforce is increasingly people who are traveling from one country to another to do the work. In Europe, we see more and more people from Poland have been building wind farms in the rest of Europe. This Polish workforce is also now working in Poland, and increasingly it's Romanians and other nationalities that are traveling around. In Asia, that's not really taking place yet, but the Filipino government was the one that came to us and said, "Hey, we'd like to see a mechanism so that our population, our countrymen, can travel and help other countries in building the energy transition. So part of the ask to governments is just to use and recognize industry best practices and standards as we have defined them in our organizations. It's quite it's a very simple ask, but it may be complex to do for the individual government. So the report and the work details a lot of case studies about how other countries have actually done it. And we've done this with governments in Japan. We've done this with association in Brazil. We've seen examples in Ireland. We've seen examples in Netherlands, where government programs are built on our standards, the standards that we have developed with industry throughout the years, because it makes sense.
Yeah. And just to build on that point, a lot of people, when they look at a position like that, how does a government recognize an industry standard like this? We're not talking about putting it into legislation. We're not talking about requiring it under law. We're talking about understanding that this is what the industry is looking for, and accepting it as a relevant way to train people.
Yes, well, you're touching upon an important point, especially in emerging markets. And in some governments, you have a tradition for being very prescriptive in how you regulate. And if you're a new and emerging market and you are also prescriptive in the way you regulate, you tend to take pieces from other existing legislation, oil and gas, grid, electricity, and then you apply that in your regulation and regulating us as a new industry in that market. And that's an inefficient way and an impractical way for us. And so just alerting governments to that fact, that it's not necessarily smart to use the regulation from other industries, is something we have to get out there and say more than we do.
Thanks, Jacob. I'm going to come back to something a bit more specific then, because we know, John, in Vestas' case, there are some examples of OEMs who have a very specific approach to competence management and training programs for their workforces. How do we manage that from a governance point of view, training to ensuring competence on the job? Can you give us just a flavor of how that looks, perhaps from your own company's point of view, and if any of that is generic, how that appears?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, from a Vestas perspective, we've, particularly the growth around our O&M business is a key strategic priority. The ability to provide the workforce for that is also a key priority and a risk, actually. And I think it actually starts a little bit before kind of competency management. It really needs to link to workforce, not even workforce, but actually how we manage our work. So the level of detail at which we understand what our sort of service demand is in terms of work and work orders, it's millions of hours a year, and then the ability to map that to a skills management system. So not only do you know how many hours of work, but we know the type of work, we know the complexity of the work, and we know the skill level that's associated with that work. So we've put a huge effort in the last few years into really kind of understanding that and understanding that mapping. And once you have that, it gives you a sort of demand signal. So this is the requirement. You have some decisions to make. You say, well, is that a requirement we want to meet internally or externally? If it's internally, then it flows into a hiring demand. So how does it link to our kind of recruitment teams? And how does it link to our training demand? So how are you going to build that kind of competence through training programs? And increasingly, we're looking at not just how you sort of train people to that level, to that requirement, but how we ensure that competence. We are seeing this shift now towards a less experienced workforce, potentially a lower skilled workforce in a lot of our key markets. So it's not enough just to train people. Actually, you really need to ensure that they demonstrate that competence in the field, and that can be certified, it can be recorded. And we have to be really clear that we're mapping and sending the right people to do the right work, because otherwise we put ourselves in, a real sort of safety, quality risk situation. So a lot of work and effort has gone into that systems architecture around work demand, hiring need or internal need, internal training system, and then competency verification, validation in the field.
Are we talking about something there that's more or less advanced in different parts of the industry? Is this something that's beginning to become an industry practice, this kind of approach and thinking?
Yeah, I would say it's. I mean, it's certainly. I talk a lot to my peers in other OEMs and through the sort of GWO network as well. It's something I think everybody's focused on because your ability to ensure that you have the right workforce that you need is a key differentiator. In terms of safety and quality, but also cost. We focus a lot on. Well, I think the biggest driver of cost in the service industry is labor. So if you're not really on top of what you need, how do you actually be in control of that cost?
Okay. So we're coming towards the end of the panel discussion. One of the areas we haven't discussed yet is individual markets. As Feng mentioned, we've got 6 focus markets in this year's report: USA, Brazil, France, Germany, India, and Australia. There's an awful lot of research and analysis that's gone into those sections of the report. Content-wise, it's almost half of the report itself, actually. Plenty of case studies about good practice. And I want to bring Kshitij into the conversation. You're dialing in from Delhi today, and you've got a lot of insight on how the Indian market, being such a fast-paced sector, is growing, and what kind of workforce development initiatives have been taking place to support that growth. Kshitij, what are your observations on that part of the world?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ralph. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I guess it's a very interesting to see how in the last 4 years, since we have been tracking the India market, especially me, I have been working with GWEC for almost 2 years. So it's very interesting to note that in 2022, India added 1.8 gigawatt, then followed by 2023, where we were 2.8 gigawatt, then followed by in 2024, we were 3.4 gigawatt. And this year especially has been a great year for India, which almost 6.4 gigawatt new onshore wind capacity. And in GWAC, we have also in our Q3 outlook report mentioned that in the next 5 years, India is expected to install almost 40 gigawatt of new onshore wind capacity. So ultimately, this will lead to more job opportunity, more growth. Also, very interesting to note that the role in this year report, we have also mentioned that how some of the organization role has been rapidly in terms of providing job opportunities. So one of them which I have highlighted in our summary this year is the role of GWO. How they have GWO trained personals, which were 2000 in 2018, and now in 2024 it's almost increased to 20,000. So these are some of the key highlights which we have added in our report. Also, another interesting thing which recently the government of India has come out with is the new labor codes, which will be very interesting to see how these labor codes discuss about social security, safety, health, working condition. And for the wind industries, these labor codes will be very interesting to discuss about in terms of complex requirement, operational planning, and workforce management and timings. So I guess these labor codes will be very interesting to note from the upcoming years. And also in our report, we have also mentioned that if India can increase its annual new installation to around 15 gigawatt, we can see that more than 154,000 new job opportunity will be developed. And then if we can increase to almost 8 to 15, then it can around 2 lakhs new job opportunity in the market. And also in our report, we have also mentioned that how total employment in the wind sector has arose and how it has been increasing, that how it was in 15,000 workers in 2023 and almost now it is 19,000, and we are expecting more than 30,000 new workforce demand in the upcoming by 2030. So these are some of the things, Ralph, we have highlighted in our report, which will be very key. And also one last point which I just want to mention, that this year India has took back his position as the third largest wind market, followed by China and of course US. Now India is the third largest wind market in 2025. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you. Over to you.
Thank you, Kshitij. Australia has been an interesting case study as well. Fung, you had some specific thoughts about that market because it's on the cusp of becoming a rapid developer of offshore wind, for example. What are your observations of that market, just to finish us off?
Yeah, Australia is a very interesting market, Ralph. As I mentioned, it's one of the top 10 market, we believe, in terms of a new addition for the next 5 years. So GWEC, we had our APEC summit took place in Melbourne twice in the past 3 years, 2023 and last year, 2025, September as well. Looking at the pipeline, I think probably John can echo later because Vestas is one of the strongest suppliers in that market. Looking at the onshore pipeline, almost 100 gigawatt for onshore. Offshore, of course, there are some negative news reported due to the cancellation of the auctions or postpone of the offshore wind auction in Victoria. But still, looking at offshore pipeline alone, there are like 25 gigawatt. You got all the big European account. The key drivers are looking at offshore wind first in Victoria and some state as well. But how to get this project built? I just want to, share some, insight I heard from the leading turbine OEM over there during our event activity, APEC Summit in that market. For example, Goodwin is the world #1 turbine OEM in terms of annual installation. Probably this year, the company are going to build more turbine in Australia. Already, I saw just across the new year, Goodwin post on social media, at least the full project has been completed in Australia. I had a conversation with the CEO of Goodwin International, for example, last year, a couple of times, even before Christmas in London, we had our GWEC board meetings. We had a conversation about the workforce. I think it's clear the path of workforce training in Australia is far behind what we need to get this strong project pipeline executed. The problem is that I think it's a wage. First of all, it's work costing. It's not just the workforce. It's the same about infrastructure as well, road, grid transmission. But looking at the training program, I think company like Goodwin, they just felt there's gaps between what the industry needs and and also the government's perception about how many workforce we need. So therefore, company like Goodwin, they are pushing for with the state government, looking at the cooperation with the university. I think this is not the first initiative. Looking at what we hear here, even for example, leading offshore wind developer, including also the CIP, they were in a conversation with University of Queensland, for example, Victoria. They have similar initiative. Earlier, I think Hachin presented the key findings. This will also highlight in this report regarding the responsibilities in terms of the training. I think what we see, the gaps in Australia basically reflect the challenge across the global industry. Got a strong pipeline. We know exactly what we need, but there is a lack of the communication between the government. So countries across global, they are also looking at transition, trying to make sure that the marriage, the energy transition, also in terms of the job transition from the fossil fuel industry into renewable. But what's the exact size of the existing jobs which can be transformed from fossil fuel into renewable? Those kind of information, I think somehow it's maybe it's already there, but I think we need a better communication, I think, from the case in Australia before we can see, okay, we are ready. Not just the industry, I think from the government perspective, how you can get this ambitious renewable target implemented by 2030 in Australia. So yeah, again, I think it's still a long way to go. There's one numbers mentioned, I remember in the case study in this report, there's an organization called the Power and Skill Organization in Australia forecast a shortfall of 42,000 of clean energy neighbors. But what we need is more than double. So how we're going to get 42,000 workforce trained within 5 years. Again, organization like us, GWEC, GWO, I think we've got a lot of work to do. We're going to continue to push in this direction. Thank you.
Oh yes, thanks for the final word, Fung. We've got we're right up to time, but we did have a couple of questions that came in from the audience, the participants, and one of them I think in particular, Jakob, you be interested in answering. It's a question from Iya. I hope I've pronounced the name correctly. Asking, electrical work must comply with local grid codes. How does GWO adapt its certification to meet these local requirements, and how can we, I assume, markets or training providers or employers avoid over investing in certifications? I guess perhaps that's relevant to other training standards as well. Yeah.
Yes, no, thank you. Well, I think I'd like to answer the question in a little bit more broad way with an example from Brazil. So recently we undertook some work in 2025 with the Brazilian Wind Association, GWEC, and created a national guideline on safety training and safety competences for the entry-level technician. And the work essentially looks at what are local Brazilian national requirements, safety and technical requirements for that type of work, and how does that map up against GWO training and the skills and competencies you will get after attending GWO courses. And doing that mapping shows that applying the portfolio training standards from GWO, you will meet all of the requirements that are there in place in Brazil for that type of a worker. But right now, the practices are that industry is doing specific training for the national requirements, and they're also doing GWO training. So they're actually over-investing in training. And so with this analysis that has been done in conjunction between GWEC, ourselves, and employers in Brazil, we now have a baseline for employers in Brazil to say, hey, we're not going to over-invest in training anymore. We'll just do training that either meets both requirements at the same time, or have a conversation with government about applying GWO training and as a recognition of meeting local requirements, so that we can have mobility of workforces coming from other countries, or even Brazilian workers working as they're doing to a large extent right now in the US, because they, with GWO training, meets the requirements in the US. So that's something that we can do, is work on mapping out what are the requirements and how does our standards actually meet those requirements locally in the largest markets.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Jakob. Thank you, John, Fung, Kshitij, Hai-Ching, and also all of the participants. We've got a couple of other questions that have come in. We will answer all of them in writing, and we're also holding another roughly duplicate version of this webinar today at 2 o'clock, so you can also join in. There'll be some different participants in that, hopefully providing some more perspectives, so don't expect a completely repeat performance. But thank you for joining us today, and have a nice rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and hopefully see you again later on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.